Welcome to today's episode on Jealousy is a Clue, a reminder that our podcast is not medical advice.
The intention of today's episode is to talk about jealousy, recognize that it's a human emotion that is an important clue to desire.
We hope that you'll discover that jealousy is not a problem, that it can be a teacher.
Takeaways are that jealousy, envy, comparison, resentment, while they might feel negative, can actually be incredibly helpful. And embracing them and showing up with curiosity for them is a powerful tool.
So I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about the difference between jealousy and envy, because that actually came up as we were prepping for today's episode. So dictionary.com notes that jealousy and envy, both of these terms involve a feeling of desire for what another person has, but that jealousy has a more negative connotation because it involves oftentimes a resentment toward the other person. Whereas envy is also construed as quote unquote a negative feeling, but that there's actually more of a mix of both admiration and discontent. But the envy, this word itself, does not usually imply a resentment or a hostility towards the other person.
What comes to mind right away here is that when we are jealous or have envy, we immediately judge ourselves for that. And so that's why we feel it so negatively too. And that we have kind of been trained to think it's bad to be jealous or it's bad to be envious. And that's where we associate it instantly with this discontent and resentment. And I think the invitation of this podcast and the invitation of that post that I wrote about jealousy, that was the inspiration for this podcast, is that if we step back and show up for jealousy and or envy in a more mindful, spacious way, and we pause and are present and just consider what might be the clue, what might be the message, what is underneath that for us. I think that's such a beautiful way to look at something that immediately evokes the negative.
And that adage can be applied to all emotions. And how interesting it is that emotions, we have a tendency to label as good or bad emotions, when really, if you think about it, it's all data.
Yeah, I love the idea of emotions are data. And we are getting data about how we think and feel about things, and data about what we want more of and less of. And if we could think about emotions in that way, we wouldn't try to eliminate them. I'm actually thinking of our last podcast and the idea that like discomfort or worry or anxiety is a problem. And yet there's clues and good information there too. And so, yes, some feel better than others. And of course, we want more ones that feel good. But now that I have switched to thinking about this jealousy and envy as clues, I think they're really powerful. And I wanted to reflect, there's an exercise that I have shared in blog posts and I share with coaching clients as well, this green with envy exercise, and looking at things where you were so surprised that you were envious of something or a place or something. And I have written in the past about a yoga studio that I found myself in Hawaii about 6 or 7 years ago. And I had this just tremendous envy of the owner and how I really, I thought, wow, this would be my dream job. And it's a little bit intriguing to think that I would want to go from being a doctor to having a little yoga studio on a hilltop in Hawaii. And I think noticing what I was envious of was a tremendous clue as to who I was and where I was in that season of life and where I was going. And what's so interesting, if you look at who I am now and what I do, all of those things were in that post and about what I was envious about this place. And it was a beautiful space in nature with beautiful breezes and light. And the purpose of it was to help people be healthier. And it was in the midst of a park and had community and all of these things that are very important to me. And so it was probably a harbinger of where I was headed. And yet at the moment, all I felt was envy. Wow, I've made a mistake. How come I'm not here owning this yoga studio in this beautiful spot? And at the time, I wasn't even a yoga teacher. So it's even more interesting that that's how I ended up. So I like to think rather than jealousy being a problem, I think we often think about it as fear or inadequacy, or I don't have something, or I need to do something. Something needs to be fixed or changed. And there's something wrong with me. That's the judgment. Can we look at jealousy as a clue to what we desire? Jealousy and or envy, I use them a little bit equally. Perhaps I shouldn't, but I'm going to here. So I think of it as a clue to the things I'm interested in, the things I like or I want or important to me. And sometimes we don't know what those are, but when we see them in someone else, it's instant. It's like, oh, that I would really like to have that. I also see them as clues to how we want to feel in our life. And so when we think about feelings, sometimes we might just want to feel that sense of peace and relaxation, or sense of purpose, or sense of alignment. But those things for me would come from completely different things than for you, for example. And so sometimes those jealousy and envious feelings are actually reflecting how we want to feel and wishing we could feel that way. And that doesn't necessarily require changing a circumstance or changing a situation or changing a job or a spouse or a child. It's often working on your own thoughts about them.
You can use envy and jealousy as data to live life more in alignment on your own terms.
I really like that. And I think it doesn't mean that you need to change something. I just want to go back to that. Like, I think it helps you set your direction, or maybe it helps you begin to pivot. Maybe it's that first step, or the the thing that sparks your mind to switch to something else. It can be a clue to help you connect and notice your values as well. And I think sometimes we don't pause enough to check in with our values. And maybe some of these are core values that we've had our whole life. But even checking in with your values each year, what are your priorities? Where do you want to be setting your GPS? And when you come at it from that place, you come at it from such a source of strength rather than a source of reactivity. And so you can step out of that inadequacy that we often feel when that initial emotion of jealousy comes up, or maybe even fear. I think that we come to jealousy in our mind means scarcity, but doesn't have to. And if we could use some of this reframing, how might our experience be so very different? So that brings me to this idea of jealousy and envy as learning tools. And if they're there to teach you, how amazing would that be? And if you can approach it that way, how much more might you learn from that? And could it even be a gift?
I love that idea that it could potentially be a gift. Haven't thought about it that way, because it's labeled, jealousy and envy are labeled so frequently as, oh, you shouldn't be jealous or you shouldn't have envy. I mean, it's one of the quote unquote deadly sins, right? Like envy. So it's already like.
But what's so interesting is we all have jealousy and envy. And so then we all have a deadly sin. And how's that?
Normalizing the common humanity of having envy as a human emotion right there.
Oh, that's pretty cool. I'm also thinking back to, like, relationships and jealousy about your partner. What if it's a reflection of love too? Like, you wouldn't be jealous if you didn't love them. It reminds me a bit of worry as a reflection of love. And that maybe detaching from it and detaching from the judgment of ourselves around it is also a really powerful tool. I thought it would be worthwhile also delving into this concept of compare and despair, which also comes to mind with jealousy as well. And that I think we get into this idea of comparing ourselves to others and noticing where we fall short and how we don't match up. And again, we want to bull in a china shop our way out of it. I'm just going to not compare myself to others, and I'm not going to despair. And yet maybe that's just part of our humanity. And so what if we didn't resist it? Or what if we decided, when we automatically went to compare and despair, which I'm just going to say, like, we all do, could we use that and say, okay, well, here I am comparing and despairing because that's what I do. What can I learn from this? Or how do I want to be inspired by this? Maybe I haven't been living in alignment.
Also, I wanted to share from Moya Sarner in an article in The Guardian that this phenomenon has been described literally for thousands of years. Aristotle actually defined in the 4th century BC as pain at the sight of another's good fortune, stirred by those who have what we ought to have. So this is not a modern phenomenon, even though this compare and despair is literally right at our fingertips to be amplified with our smartphones and namely in social media. There is literally an envy amplifying device in the palm of our hands. So in terms of the social media and the literature around social media, the more you scroll, there is a dose response to the more envy becomes amplified.
This is awesome. Your phone as an envy amplifying device. So when you feel envy and you feel jealousy or you're comparing and despairing, it's just the device.
Yeah. And when we are scrolling social media, I have to remind myself that I am sometimes comparing myself, my insides, to someone's outsides, someone else's quote unquote photoshopped lives.
Yeah.
And that definitely exerts a tremendous toll on some of us.
And tremendous toll on teenagers in particular, I just want to add. And they are some of the heaviest users of social media. And so if we think about our children, rather than judging them for it, just realizing that that is part of the way that the device works. The other thing that you stated there, which was just struck me, you said we're jealous of things we think we ought to have. And I wanted to shift the word and say things we would like to have. And it feels totally different. One is inspirational and one is a judgment, falling short, inadequate, scarcity, not. And so I find sometimes, like if we say I have to, or I should, or I need to, or I was supposed to, like that energy is very different than I would like to, I want to, I hope to. Someday I will. And so perhaps when we get into jealousy, just reminding ourselves that our brain is saying, oh, I should have had that, or I ought to have that, or I'm supposed to have that. But you could change it to, wow, what a clue of something I want to have. How do I want to get myself there?
What if envy and jealousy are actually small openings of doorways for what could be possible?
Yeah. I mean, we often talk about looking at other people and like, my success is an example of what's possible. I think for many of us, our default thought there goes to like, yeah, but not for me. And we go into the jealousy or the frustration or the despair. And so I love this idea of what is possible for you, or what would you like to have? What do you want more of?
Yeah, and even that slight shift in inviting a possibility can make a whole lot of difference in beginning to not judge envy and jealousy so harshly.
I'm reminded of the Rumi quote that the cracks let the light in. And so the jealousy just creates the crack that can let the light in to shine more on your true desires and what you want more of in your life or less of. But that, if you use it as an emotion for good, realizing that all emotions have a purpose, and I'm full circle back to the beginning of the podcast where we judge emotions as good or bad. But if all emotions have a purpose and all emotions are part of our humanity, the ones that feel good and bad in comparison, and also they're just part of the color and flavor of a human life, that we can look at each one and notice our judgment because that's our default thought about them and default emotion about them. That's a bad one. And then we can use them and say, how can I use jealousy for me? Or how can I use envy for me? Or what is the learning in this?
So much learning to be had. I wanted to bring up the idea for a potential antidote, something that I'm working towards and learning more and more about is the concept of sympathetic joy. So this is coming from the Stanford Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education. that the definition of sympathetic joy is a feeling which arises when one regards all beings with loving kindness and then perceives those who are happy and have created a lot of merit or even attained liberative insight, so that we can rejoice in the good fortune of others. So, this way, we can actually overcome resentment, envy, and jealousy, and as we were talking about, find inspiration in the accomplishments of others. So we can flip envy and jealousy and find that inspiration and feel happy for them too.
My mind says that would be hard to do, right? Just like it feels aspirational. And I'm thinking about what's the path to get there. And I think for me, it's the curiosity and just allowing, like, that's what allows my mind to open. Why is this happening? Why am I feeling this way? What is the learning? And also thinking about ultimately who we want to be, or um, because ultimately I think we do want more joy in the world. We want joy for ourselves. And so when you can see what you want, you can also see what you want for humanity and for others.
I agree in that, like, flipping from noticing envy and jealousy and then automatically bringing in sympathetic joy somewhat is unnatural initially. But like we can practice, we could aspire or learn, take the steps, as you had mentioned, towards feeling even just a little bit of sympathetic joy.
And I think noticing and acknowledging that it's hard is going to make it easier to say, yes, aspirationally, I would like to have sympathetic joy. I think we all would, because more joy is joy, right? But realizing that it's a big step and that we need to take baby steps, and noticing for each of us, what are those baby steps to help us find more joy, and noticing where perhaps we are exceptional at it. Because I think we are exceptional at it. For example, for our children, when they do something and they're so filled with joy, we can share in it. So how can we share in it there? What are the thoughts that help us get there? And how can we extend those thoughts to other things and use them as sort of a bridge or a stepping stone, something we often talk about in coaching? Where are we able to have sympathetic joy? And how can we slightly tweak those thoughts to give us more sympathetic joy in other situations?
Another point about jealousy and envy showing up is that sometimes it's helpful to notice how it feels in the body. So what the emotion feels like in the body. So what does jealousy and envy feel like in your body? And in noticing that can help with allowing and accepting the presence of it before we're so quick to try to transform it.
I think they are emotions that we immediately judge and try to get rid of because they're considered bad. And I think we judge ourselves as bad, like, what's wrong with me? I'm not supposed to be jealous. It's a deadly sin. And yet, if we could sit there and just experience them hand to heart with a little compassion that all humans are jealous and what's in this for me without resisting it, I sometimes offer to people the idea of moving it around. So you notice it as a grapefruit or a softball, and what does it look like and what color is it? And then actually letting it move and float through your body to soften it can help you see what the message in it is. This reminds me a bit of the yoga class I taught a couple of weeks ago was on aches and pains, and thinking about that pain and that ache, whether it's an emotional ache or a physical ache, as something that is a message and sending you a text, perhaps. And we would judge a text a little bit less harshly than pain. And I think that's true with jealousy too. It's sort of a painful emotion and a negative emotion. But what if it were exactly a text or a message or a clue?
And so we'll ask you more reflection questions now as we close the podcast. Where are you noticing jealousy or envy showing up in your life?
How can you practice allowing jealousy, being curious about it, and potentially even getting to the point where you can see jealousy as an inspiration to pursue something that you have always wanted to do but haven't done yet?
We'd love to work with you on experiencing and noticing, allowing and accepting the full breadth of human emotions at our Mindful Healers Connect in Nature retreat early bird registration has officially opened. We'd love to join you in person to experience all of this.
And I would love it if you joined me for yoga. I've actually been exploring tons of negative emotions recently, and I noticed always that those classes seem to have the most people choosing to partake in them, which is interesting in and of itself. But I think that the movement and the breath and the softening into it, it's a way of allowing those emotions and exploring them in a creative, non-threatening way that really allows mindset shifts. So I would love to have you join me either on Zoom for live stream coaching or on YouTube or yoga, pardon me. And then doing the yoga with the coaching is also really powerful. So join me for something, yoga, coaching, a retreat before next summer, and do take advantage of the early bird on the Mindful Healers Connect in Nature retreat while it's still there.
Join us at the mindfulhealthcarecollective.com or the Facebook group of over 2,500 healthcare professionals from around the world. Thank you so much for listening. Please join us after the sound of the singing bowl for our mindful moment offering. Welcome to today's mindful moment offering. Inviting you to close eyes or lower your gaze a few inches in front of you if it's safe for you to do so. And as you're ready, inviting you to place both hands atop your heart. Noticing the sensations of hand over heart and that interface. Next, inviting you to conjure up a circumstance that may be recent or in the past that has induced the emotions of jealousy or envy. Bringing that recollection into your mind's eye. Noticing the body sensations of what jealousy or envy feel like for you. Perhaps at the chest or in the belly. Noticing what those body sensations are like. Recognizing that jealousy and envy are common human emotions, and that this felt experience of jealousy or envy is experienced by many in the world, perhaps even at the same time, right now. You're not alone in this sensation of how you experience jealousy and envy. Inviting you to allow and to accept those emotions for being here just as they are. Knowing that there's nothing wrong or shameful about feeling jealous or envious. And can you give yourself some grace and compassion for normalizing those emotions as being part of the common human experience? And as you're ready, inviting you to delve a little bit deeper, being curious without judgment about what information jealousy or envy showing up in this circumstance might be providing to you. Is there an opportunity or a characteristic about the other person that you might be having jealousy or envy towards, that you might want or aspire for? Can you recognize those pieces of information as simply data? Data that you can choose how you process, how it might guide or inform you for future goals, or possibilities that you might want to work towards or for. Can you allow yourself to recognize that these pieces of information might be helpful for you and get you closer to your authentic self, perhaps even an authentic purpose? And then as you're ready, coming back to the sensations of your hands over the heart, recognizing that unconditional support and love is available to you in this moment. And perhaps if you'd like, as we end this practice, you can stay with curiosity and journal a little bit more about what possible information could be arising for you in this particular circumstance of jealousy or envy. Inviting you to blink open eyes, letting the light back in. Thank you so much for practicing with me today.